So there's normally a reason that everybody loves a Howie Roseman draft class across the media, and it's normally the reason the Eagles have success in the draft. I'll tell you why coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcoming Eagles fans to this Friday edition of the show. And we are brought to you by Amazon Fire TV for Stick. Turn any TV into your Xbox. No console needed. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Lockdown to learn more. So I would say since 2021, obviously since 2021, the post-Carson Wentz era, it feels like draft class after draft class, Howie Roseman is absolutely nailing it. Not just in the early rounds, but on day 2, on day 3, finding undrafted gems like we talked about on the show yesterday, like a Reed Blankenship. Just banger after banger after banger, right? But even before the draft class ends up panning out, it's funny how you look across the NFL circles, the minute the draft is over, there's so many people that always just applaud the Eagles draft. You know, you look at all these media draft grades on different websites, different podcast platforms, different sites of social media. Howie Roseman normally year after year gets an A, an A-, an A+. And there's some football guys out there, some analysts, some fans, I'm sure some members of actual NFL organizations that roll their eyes at Howie Roseman's constant praise that he receives after a draft class. And they always make the statement, it's, oh, you only like a Howie Roseman draft class because you know all the players that he took. But yeah, that is a reason that most people do love a Howie Roseman draft class. And that's also the reason that the Eagles normally have success in the NFL draft. His new keep it simple, stupid draft approach, I think it's been a huge reason for their draft success. And I'm not going to say it's the main reason that these draft classes have hit. I'm not even going to say that every pick has this philosophy in mind, because just a year ago, Howie Roseman drafted a cornerback out of the University of Toledo in the first round. So it's not like he's always just drafting players from Georgia, players from Alabama, players at the most premier positions, edge rushers, offensive linemen. Like, he did take an inside linebacker this year and a safety in round 2. He took 2 corners last year out of Toledo, out of Iowa. So it's not always his MO. But normally, when Howie Roseman in the post-2020 world has gone with the best players at the best schools, when he sticks to the consensus board, which he does more than any NFL general manager in football, he normally drafts players that are atop draft boards across media platforms, across fan platforms, across NFL circles as well. And that's been a huge reason for their success. And again, you don't always want to scout the helmet, because that's where you can get into trouble. Not every prospect from Alabama or Georgia does pan out. And if you do that, you're going to often miss out on guys like a Quinyon Mitchell, right? So it's 2025. You could come from anywhere and make it in the NFL. Like, if you're a really good talent, probably doesn't matter what school you go to, the NFL is going to find you. And the Eagles have seen that year after year. I mean, they found Jordan Mailata from across the globe in Australia. He didn't even play football, and now he is one of your franchise pillars at the left tackle position. So I don't want to say, again, this is like set in stone. Like, this is what Howie Roseman does. But I do feel like back in the day, before 2021, the Devontae Smith pick is really when this all started, right? The Heisman winner at Alabama, a position of need, an important position, a high floor player. It wasn't about one specific trait like with Jalen Reagor. It wasn't about, one or two things that you got hyper-focused on. He just took a really good player from a really good school, and it worked out. 2021 is where this all started. But if you go back before that, I just mentioned Jalen Reagor. Oftentimes, Howie was trying to outsmart everybody. He was trying to be the smartest in the room, and sometimes that has led to a lot of success with Howie Roseman. You guys have heard me say this saying 1,000 times on the podcast. Howie Roseman zigging when the rest of the league zags often pans out, and that's what happened last year when he went out and signed Saquon Barkley. So I like that back in the day, how he tried to go against the grain and go against the consensus to get ahead. of the rest of the teams in football, but in the draft, it really didn't work out the same way it has in free agency and with trading and with draft pick collection. When it comes to like actually taking prospects, when he was trying to go against the grain, it really didn't work. That's when he got into trouble taking Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson or not trading up for CeeDee Lamb. That's when he got in trouble in 2019, taking J.J. Arcega-Whiteside over DK Metcalf, over Terry McLaurin, who on the consensus boards were a lot farther ahead than J.J. Arcega-Whiteside on wide receiver rankings. Even 2019, like trading up for Andre Dillard. You go back as far as 2014, he took Marcus Smith out of Louisville. Nobody, including me, thought Marcus Smith was higher than a bottom of the second round kind of player. I had him that year. I had him mocked to the Eagles at the top of the third round, and the Eagles took him in the 20s of day one. So I like that normally Howie Roseman tries to find market inefficiencies, tries to be different than the rest of the NFL. But I think in the draft, what's actually helped him get better as a drafter is the opposite. Keep it simple, stupid. Like he has been taking the best players at the best schools at very important positions. And it worked in 2021, taking Devontae Smith and Landon Dickerson. It worked in 2022 to a degree, taking Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean. In 2023 with Jalen Carter, with Nolan Smith. Even Kenyon and Coop last year, like they didn't go to Alabama or Georgia or a top-tier school from the SEC. Coop was at Iowa, but it's not like a top school on a Power 5. And those guys still panned out, though, because they were big names. They were consensus day one selections. Most people thought Quinyon Mitchell was a top 10, top 15 player that fell into the 20s. And Cooper DeJean, most thought was an end of day one pick that fell a little bit. And the Eagles got him at the top of the second round. So even those guys, I think, back up this philosophy that Howie's been following. And people like to make fun of it. Howie critics like to roll their eyes at this mentality. And I think it's because they get annoyed and jealous that he always gets these A-plus draft grades. And it's just them saying, you guys know these guys because you had them in your mock drafts. And you don't know the rest of the league. You didn't take time to learn enough players. And while that might be true to a degree, when they're talking about fans and media, like that's absolutely right. But Howie taking this approach has really, really helped this Eagles team not just build a short-term core in a championship window, but a long-term sustaining core as well. And so people can make fun of it, but I really do think it's been one of the main reasons this roster has turned around things incredibly since 2020 and have made 2 Super Bowls. I talked about it yesterday, just saying it sounds so simple, yet nobody's really tried it. Howie just said, I'm going to take all these players from the best college defense of all time and put them into my defense. It sounds like something a kid would do in Madden, right? But it works. It worked. So you can make fun of it all you want, but the consensus approach that Howie has taken over the last 4 to 5 years, it's paid off dividends. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, I want to get into some players that they have a big summer coming up, and it's not the most obvious ones. It's players that could have a role on this team, but the floor could be they're not even on the roster. What are we getting from some players we're not talking about enough? I'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV 4-Stick. Did you guys know that your TV, your Amazon Fire TV, is also an Xbox? That's right. Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to go. Dive into hundreds of premium titles, including EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty, as easily as you stream your favorite shows. For me, it's awesome traveling on the road, growing up as a kid. You couldn't bring your PlayStation with you. You couldn't bring your Xbox with you. Now you can bring your Fire TV Stick 4K anywhere and play your games or your kids' games. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. All right, so last week I did a show. Was it last week or Monday? It feels like forever already. But I did a winners and losers podcast post-draft, talking about guys that their stock was on the rise after the draft based on the Eagles' decisions or lack thereof, and then guys that had their stock hurt based on draft picks. So, for instance, Moro Ojomo was a big winner coming out of the draft because the Eagles didn't take a pass rushing defensive tackle until the 4th round. And while I like Ty Robinson, he's not a threat, I think, right now to take Ojoma's spot next to Jalen Carter. If the Eagles would have moved up for Walter Nolan, there's no bigger role for Moro Ojomo this year. He is who he was last year as that 3rd or 4th guy in the rotation, sharing time with Jordan Davis, right? So Moro Ojomo was a big winner. While a big loser, in my opinion, was Sidney Brown because the Eagles drafted Drew Makuba on day 2 in the 2nd round, and they're going to start him at safety next to Reed Blankenship unless he's just terrible or gets hurt. Today I do want to dive into a little bit more some other players that have a big summer coming up based on what the Eagles did in the draft, but it's players that we really don't talk about a lot because we're focused on other players at that spot that we want to win these jobs or other draft picks they just brought in. But these are some players that have really interesting situations. Like, I don't think the Eagles are banking on any of these guys to have prominent roles in 2025, but they are players that the Eagles have some sort of hope. Like, let's see what we have. Like, we're not banking on them, but let's just see what we have. And the obvious ones are like Azeez Ojulari, Joshua Uche, these new players the Eagles brought in to, just kind of kick the tires on. Former top picks that fell out of favor with the team, low risk, high reward signings. But there's some other guys too that fit this MO that we're just not talking about a lot. Like, for instance, Kenyon Green, who came over from the Chauncey Gardner-Johnson trade. Kenyon Green is not somebody I think the Eagles are banking on, even to the degree of Mekhi Becton last year. Like, the Eagles, when they signed Mekhi Becton after the draft, again, the expectations, I don't think they could have assumed they were going to get what they got out of Becton in 2024. I mean, he was amazing. He was one of the best right guards in football. I don't think they were expecting that, but I do think they had high hopes for him potentially beating out Tyler Steen for that right guard starting job. I don't think with Kenyon Green, they have the same expectations as they did with Becton. I think Kenyon Green's floor is a lot lower. Becton's problem in New York was a lot more about injuries than it was performance. With Kenyon Green, he was really bad in Houston. So I think if they're going in expecting Kenyon Green to be the next Mekhi Becton, I think that's just an irresponsible mindset. But at the same time, it is a similar approach. Like, Kenyon Green was a top 15 draft pick in 2022. He was a top 15 selection for a reason. A lot of teams in the NFL that year thought he could be a blue chip prospect coming out of college. So, yeah, he's been really bad since. But I think he has the highest ceiling of any of these guards. And right now we're spending a lot of time talking about if Tyler Steen can take that jump in year 3. Can he hold off all these other guards? We're talking about a lot of these rookies they just brought in, like Drew Kendall from Boston College is a center, but the Eagles listed him as a center/guard, and I think he has a lot of traits the Eagles love in offensive linemen. I said the other day on the show, I think he could potentially be your starting right guard. What if they want to train Cam Williams coming out of Texas to play right guard? They want one of those giant tackles to play guard like they did Mekhi Becton last year. What if they want that with Hinton, right? So for me, it's interesting. We've been focusing on a lot of these other players. And then, meanwhile, here's Kenyon Green, just a former top 15 pick on your roster, and he's not very good right now. But we know Jeff Stoutland's track record. Most players that come into Philadelphia end up improving at least a little bit. We know the abilities Green has that made him a top 15 selection. I'm very curious. I'm not expecting anything out of this guy. I think he was just part of the trade with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson going to Houston was more about, I think, getting rid of Gardner-Johnson than it was acquiring Green. But he's an interesting player. I'm really curious to see him in this summer's battle royale at right guard. I mean, I think Steen's going to be battling for this job. Green's going to be battling for it. Kendall, Hinton, Williams. I think they're going to try all these guys out. I don't think they're going to use Holland Pierce at right guard, the 6'8", 341 UDFA they just brought in. But I think a lot of these players are going to cross-train and see what they have. I think Tyler Steen is the favorite to win the job, but I think Steen is like the worst-case scenario for them. I think he's the floor. Like, if nobody else, we want somebody else to win it. We want somebody to give us a reason to not start Tyler Steen. I think that was the same mindset as last year with Mekhi Becton. And I think they almost hope that Kenyon Green or somebody else gives them a reason to not start Tyler Steen. So Green has an opportunity. The Eagles are not expecting it from him. he was just a part of that trade. Just, let's see what we have. But he has an opportunity, as good as anybody on this roster, to win a job this summer. But he's got a long way to go because his tape from the Texans was not great. That's what I'll say. He is a similar situation as Mekhi Becton, but I had a lot higher hopes for Becton coming in than Green. But that's why I'm so interested in him, because top 15 pick that's been really bad, but you got Jeff Stoutland. It's an open job. Very curious how that pans out. Another player that I just have no idea what we're getting this year, but there is some window for a role, is Johnny Wilson, who wasn't my guy for me in last year's draft class, coming out of Florida State. A day 3 selection, 6'6", just crazy wingspan. Looks like a basketball player out there. Johnny Wilson, kind of like Kenyon Green, not very good since he's come into the NFL. Last year was his first season. I thought he had some really bad drops, including that one in the Super Bowl that we all remember. He's got a long way to go with his hands as a route runner, creating separation. But when you look at Johnny Wilson, again, he has crazy unicorn-like traits for wide receiver, and I think he moves pretty well. He's pretty explosive for a guy that big. When you look at the Eagles' wide receiver depth chart behind Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, both short-term and long-term, you've got Jahan Dotson there this year, so he's going to be wide receiver 3. But outside of that, who's competing with Johnny Wilson for that 4th spot? Ainias Smith, and who else? Some UDFAs? Terrace Marshall Jr.? I mean, Johnny Wilson has a great opportunity to be a top 4 receiver again this year and maybe have an even bigger role. Because Dotson next year, the Eagles did not pick up the 5th-year option. He's going to be unrestricted free agent, and we'll see what happens this year. But if he has a better year than last year, he probably will want to go elsewhere where he has a better opportunity for more targets. So in 2 years, Johnny Wilson could be looking at being the wide receiver 3 if he takes advantage of this opportunity. And even this year, there's a role for him, because he has that niche role of being just this giant target for Jalen Hurts in third downs and in obvious passing situations in the red zone. If they want a bigger body out there, they might rotate him in more with Dotson if he improves his hands, if he improves as a route runner. And by the way, if they lose Dallas Goedert, they're going to want a physical, big body pass catcher over the middle of the field, whether it's at receiver, or I am curious if they would consider moving Wilson to tight end. Because Johnny Wilson, one thing he was really good at last year was blocking. He was a really good blocking tight end. So Wilson's another guy. I'm just like, what's their plan for him this summer? Hey, man, the opportunity's here. It's for you to take. You could be the future wide receiver 3. You could have a much bigger role this year even as wide receiver 4 than last year. Maybe you could move positions and be an impact tight end in 12 personnel packages. Really curious what he's going to be in year 2. But that dude's got to hit the jugs machine, because his hands last year were not great. But I just keep thinking back to that touchdown against Dallas where he just towered over the defender, just caught the ball like it was nothing. He has rare traits for a receiver. The guy's 6'6", almost 6'7", with a 7-foot wingspan. I mean, just ridiculous. So Johnny Wilson's a player that was my guy for me coming out of college, and I'll be watching him closely this summer. A couple other guys, I think, for similar reasons as Johnny Wilson. How about Grant Calcaterra? Grant Calcaterra, I think, kind of like Tyler Steen, would be the best of a bad situation. I think the Eagles don't want to start him as their top tight end. I think they want to try to make it work with Dallas Goedert. They want to probably try to trade for a tight end at this point, like a Michael Mayer. I think they wanted to draft somebody in the 2nd round or the 3rd round if the board fell right. Howie talked about wanting to trade up on day 2 at some point, but just couldn't get up there. My prediction was it was for somebody like Mason Taylor out of LSU or Elijah Arroyo. But there is a world where it doesn't work with Goddard. He's gone. You can't really trade for anybody, and you're left with Calcaterra as the best case scenario, or the worst case scenario, but the best of what you've got, the best of a bad situation, I should say. And I don't want this to play out, but that's a scenario that there's a good chance that does happen. So the Eagles might not have a choice but to start Calcaterra if they move on from Goddard. So I'm going to be watching him closely as well to see, I think he took a really big step from 2023 to 2024 as a pass catcher. Can he take another leap forward? The Eagles are going to need it. I think there were some signs of him being a solid role player on this offense when Dallas Goedert did go down. So when Goddard got hurt against the Browns, in that game, Calcaterra had 4 catches for 67 yards after Goddard got injured. The next week against the Giants, nothing really. 1 catch for 5 yards. But then, against the Bengals, he did have 3 catches for 58 yards. Had some explosive plays against Jacksonville. He had 5 catches for 30. He had that really nice touchdown against the Carolina Panthers. The following week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, he did have that nice 20-yard reception over the middle of the field, going up and getting it, back shoulder, had to adjust to get the football, took a hit. Calcaterra did have some chunk yardage and some explosive plays last year. I think Jalen Hurts trusted him the more the season went on. I think it's worst case scenario, in my opinion, if he's your starting tight end, but I think you need to have a big summer out of Calcaterra because there's a world where he's your tight end 1. I don't want that. I want Dallas Goedert back. I would try to trade for somebody like a Cole Kmet or a Noah Fant to bring in a veteran with starting experience, but Calcaterra is going to be a top 2 tight end of this football team, so he's going to have a role. We'll see if he can continue to improve. One other guy here I want to talk about that we're not talking about enough, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. How about Trot Jr. in year 2? I thought showed some really positive signs last summer. There was a point, I think at the end of July, after the first preseason game when Devin White looked abysmal, and I still wasn't sold on Zach Bond yet, and Jacoby Dean was just kind of up and down. There was a point where I said Jeremiah Trotter Jr. might be your best inside linebacker on the football team. That's how good I thought he was in training camp and in the preseason. And again, it was a mixed bag with the linebackers during camp and during the preseason, but Trotter had a good summer. I thought he was really good on special teams last year, showed some signs on defense and limited action. We'll see what his role is. I have no idea. He could start early in the year if Jihaad Campbell's not fully ready with that torn labrum, or, he's kind of cross-training at edge rusher as well and is more of a rotational piece to start. Or maybe Trotter Jr. just looks like the better player at inside linebacker. He could be a starter this year early on while Nakobe Dean is recovering from his injury. And then when you look at the future, Nakobe Dean's an unrestricted free agent after the 2025 season. And we're not sure about Jihaad Campbell's long-term role with this football team. So Trotter, it's the variance, it could go one way or another. It's there's 2 extremes. On one end, he could end up just being a buried backup linebacker behind Campbell, Bond, and Dean, who all are really good players, and he's more of just a special teams ace. But there's another scenario where maybe Campbell ends up as a better player on the edge, and Nakobe Dean doesn't get a contract extension after this year, and Trotter is your starter long-term next to Zach Bond. I don't know. With Trotter, it could go one of 2 ways. It could be all the way over here where he's just buried on the depth chart, or all the way over here where I think there is a world where he's a starter, or at least a good rotational piece. Maybe Campbell's your main guy next to Bond, but then in snaps where he moves down to the edge, Trotter Jr. comes in at linebacker. There's a world where that happens within a year or 2. So Trotter's got a big summer coming up as well in year 2. Those are guys that just, again, the Eagles aren't banking on them being a go-to player in 2025 on offense or defense, but I think they have questions. Let's see what they've got, because there's a world where we could use these guys more than we're expecting. Kenyon Green, Johnny Wilson, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., Grant Calcaterra, 4 players that I'm interested to see what they do, starting with OTAs, spring minicamp, training camp as well. Those guys are interesting to me, and I don't think we're talking about them enough. All right, guys, we'll wrap up this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles. Coming up next, I do think the NFC East got better after the draft. Who got the closest? Who closed the gap the most with the Eagles? I'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, guys, we're wrapping up this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. So I think the Eagles are still by far the most complete roster in the NFL. I would say in the NFC, certainly in the NFC East. They are the team to beat, the reigning Super Bowl champions. That might sound obvious, duh. But even with all the free agent losses they had, I think the Eagles still have the deepest team, the best short-term roster, the best long-term roster to compete for championships year after year. Now, the Chiefs are the best set up because they have the best player in the world in Pat Mahomes, but from a full quantitative roster standpoint, from top to bottom, the Eagles are the best team in football. I will say, I am unfortunately a big fan of what the other teams in the NFC East did in the draft specifically. Now, do I think anybody really closed the gap with Philly, where it's 1A, 1B? No. And I know the Commanders were in the NFC Championship last year, and I really like their draft. Josh Connerly is a good player. the tackle coming out of Oregon. I love that they got Laramie Tunsil as well. So now you've got Connolly and Tunsil on both sides protecting Jaden Daniels. The Deebo Samuel move, I don't think Deebo is really that great of a player anymore, but I like the idea of surrounding your young quarterback with veteran pass catchers, bringing back Zach Ertz. I think the Trey Amos pick on day 2 in the second round was really good. So the Commanders certainly did close the gap in a way. Like, I don't even want to say that. They got better. They certainly did get better. But I do still think the Eagles are clearly superior. And I do think Washington is bound for a regression. I do think they outplayed who they really were last year, making it all the way to the Final Four. I think a lot of other teams in the NFC on a similar tier got better this offseason. So I think Washington got better, but I don't think to the point where I'm like nervous about them being a juggernaut in the NFC. I actually look at, in Dallas, I kind of feel the same way as I always do with the Cowboys. They had a solid draft. Like, I think Donovan Ezereku was a really good steal on day 2 in the second round. Shavon Ravel just fits what they want in the secondary to a T as a lengthy press man corner. The running back Blue coming out of Texas might end up starting for them. But, like, you look at the Tyler Booker pick, top 12 pick, a true guard, just not worth it for me. So Dallas is being Dallas. I think they got a little bit better, but not to the point where they're a true Super Bowl contender in the NFC. I think the team actually, of all 3 of them, that really improved the most. And of course, they had the most work to do, so they had the farthest to go. But I actually think the New York Giants are an interesting football team now. Like, Abdul Carter was, to me, a top 2 player in this draft. And you look at their pass rush now, they stole Darius Alexander in the 3rd round out of Toledo. I would have been comfortable with the Eagles taking him at 32. So their pass rush now looks like Brian Burns, Abdul Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence, and Darius Alexander. Like, good thing the Eagles have an elite offensive line, because the Giants are 5-6 guys deep with their pass rush. And Jackson Dart was my second favorite quarterback in this draft. I think he's a good player. I think, again, none of these teams close the gap where the Eagles are still clearly the kings of the NFC East. But the Giants and the Commanders, I like what they did. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to glaze up our division rivals, but they are teams to watch. I think the Giants are going to be much more competitive this year. I still think 3rd or 4th in the division, but I don't hate what they did. And Washington, they got better. But the Eagles got better too. That's the thing, is I don't think they all improved, but nobody really closed the gap, because the Eagles added some new players that can make their team even better. Like, Jihaad Campbell just adds a new wrinkle to this defense that they've never really had. As I've said before, a Swiss Army knife that can play on the inside, that can play on the edge, that can do it all. Like, Howie Roseman continues to evolve this roster as well. So, yeah, I don't think anybody closed the gap, but I will say I think the Giants had the best draft of the 3 in the division. They're the team I'm watching the most right now, as like what are they up to kind of thing. The New York Giants, they intrigue me a lot. But the Commanders, they had a solid draft, and Dallas is Dallas. They're middling. They're going to be the 3rd best team in this division, probably win 7 to 9 games, either miss the playoffs or lose in the first round, because that's what Jerry Jones and the Cowboys do, and that's what they're always going to do. But definitely want to give a quick outlook on the division, because I think they did have good drafts, and they're the closest teams we got to watch. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for joining us and making us your first listen each and every day. Back next week for 5 more shows, Monday through Friday. As always, thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.